Yes.
वीडियो स्टॉप कर दी मैंने, बहुत कंफ्यूजन हो रहा है अभी। इसमें देखूंगी चलो फोन करके बोल दियो कि चलते हैं दोनों पूजा करवाने।
गरिमा जी आप स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं, आपका माइक्रोफोन अनम्यूट हो गया है।
ठीक है प्रवीण जी। हेलो, गुड आफ्टरनून ऑल. Welcome to the Regional Distance Learning Seminar Series. Today's RDLS session will be taken by Ms. Garima Sharma on the topic Nutritional Management of HIV-infected women and their infants. Ms. Garima Sharma is working as a nutritionist in ART Center and Pediatric Center of Excellence in HIV/AIDS in Kalavati Saran Children's Hospital, New Delhi. She has done her MSc in Foods and Nutrition from Devi Ahilya University, Indore, Madhya Pradesh. She is a certified BPNI's Infant and Young Child Feeding Counseling Specialist. She had worked in various research projects and training workshops and was involved in development of nutrition and health education kit for AWW in National Institute of Public Cooperation and Child Development, MOWCD. She is actively involved in research activities. She has published many papers in national and international journals. Now I would request Ms. Garima to start the session. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's presentation is on nutritional management of HIV-infected women and their infants. So, as we all know, nutrition is basically a science which deals with digestion, absorption, and metabolism of food. So, the interaction between nutrition and infection is synergistic. Moreover, nutritional deficiency lowers resistance and aggravates infection, as when there are loss of nutrients from our body, then our body becomes a little bit weak, and our body becomes more basically the infection is aggravated in our body. And infection also affects the nutritional status. Whenever the person has an infection, the person's BMR increases, and further the nutritional status is also hindered. Next slide. Now we'll talk about nutrition and the immune system. Malnutrition has a direct impact on impaired immunity and infection, and it's basically a vicious circle. Malnutrition, impaired immunity, and infection can form a vicious circle which can worsen the condition of the individual. Whenever there is an infection in our body, then we have the immunity basically reduces. We have impaired immunity, which further leads to malnutrition. Again, a person is malnutrition nourished, and the infection will persist, and he will be more prone to infections, and again the immunity is impaired. So this becomes a vicious circle. Next slide. Metabolic changes during infection. The basal metabolic rate, which is basically the energy which is required by our body in a resting phase, also increases during infection. So there are increased nutritional demands as compared to energy, protein, fat, and all the nutrients. Moreover, if the BMR is increasing, then the nutrient losses are also increased as the body is working at rest stage also. There is more of tissue background as the infection is attacking the human body, and there are decreased absorption of nutrients as the body is not in a phase of proper
working and proper nutrient absorption. Moreover, the oral intake also decreases as we have uh, uh, nausea, vomiting, and various side effects during infections. Next slide. So the malnutrition in HIV. Since a person is an HIV infected, he or she can have poor nutrition. It could be because of the nutrition status of the patient. It could be because of some opportunistic infection. It could be because of poverty also. So whenever there is poor nutrition intake, obviously the immune system is impaired and the immunity obviously decreases. Moreover, if the immunity is decreased, the person becomes more vulnerable to infections, and there is reduced intake of food and increased loss of nutrients because the body is working uh, on a higher pace because of infection, and it is infected. So this again becomes a vicious circle, and HIV actually impacts all these four major points. Next slide. Okay, now what are the causes for poor nutrition in HIV? As I told you, it is reduced food intake. It could be because of infection. It could be because of some drug side effect. It could be because of some major OI like tuberculosis, and it could be because of poverty also. In children, it is basically because of malnutrition also. So reduced food intake is a very important point. Then reduced nutrient absorption is also a very important point for the poor nutrition in HIV. Moreover, the metabolism is also changed. So there are changes in metabolism and body composition of the person. Next slide. Classification of nutritional status of HIV infected adults. This is the classification which is given by WHO, and it explains that less than 16 BMI. BMI is basically calculated in weight in kg upon height in meter square, and the result is basically checked, and a person is basically classified as into which nutritional status the PLHIV is. Less than 16 is severe thinness. Anything uh, below 18.5 is underweight or mild thinness. 18.5 to 24.99 is a healthy weight, which explains that that person is into normal nutritional status. And above 25 again comes into malnutrition because it comes into obesity, which is overweight or grade 1 or grade 2 obesity. Next slide is estimating nutritional requirements of PLHIVs. So when we talk about the energy requirements of PLHIV, the very basic is energy needs. Energy needs are basically increased by 10% of the normal adult, male or female, whosoever is in the same age group and same weight and height. We need to increase 10% of the energy, but during symptomatic disease or any opportunistic infection or any other major problem with HIV, then the energy demands are increased to 20 to 30%. Next slide. Protein requirements are same as of non-infected person, but 12 to 15, we have to actually consider that 12 to 15% of the total calories should come from protein, and we should always advise them to have good, cheap, readily available proteins like eggs, milk, besan, soya bean, dals, meat, etc., so that they have a good amount of protein and their immune system is also better. Next slide. Fat requirements. Fat requirements again is a very important for a normal individual also, and in HIV also. About 20 to 30% of the total energy should be provided by fat, as fat gives us energy. Moreover, fat is important for various absorption of various vitamins, which are basically fat soluble, and it helps a person to maintain its nutritional status also. So 20 to 30% of the total energy should come from fat, and out of that at least 50% fat should consist of vegetable oil rich in essential fatty acids. So we So we have something called good fat and and bad fat. So we generally consider just a second, please. Just wait for 2 seconds. I will be just back. Yeah. Uh, Now I was talking about the fat. I was saying that 20 to 30% of the total energy should come from fat, and at least 50% of fat should consist essential fatty acids. So saturated fat, which we generally get from all the ghee, butter, and your basically those fats which are solid at the room temperature, like ghee, butters, should consist of 7% of the total calorie intake of the energy. Moreover, monounsaturated fatty fats and polyunsaturated fats are basically called the good fats, which are important for our body. Polyunsaturated fats are basically those fats which are not synthesized in our body, so we need to take them, and they basically consist of omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids. Whereas polyunsaturated fats are called the best fats, basically, and they should also be 10% or less of the total calorie intake. Some examples of monounsaturated fatty acids is like walnuts, spinach, cauliflower, tofu, and polyunsaturated fatty acids are, I'm sorry, monounsaturated fatty acids are your groundnut, peanut, rice bran oils, mustard oils. And for polyunsaturated fatty acids, it's soya bean, corn, sunflower, tofu, cauliflower, all these. Next slide. Now, micronutrient requirements. Micronutrient requirements play a very significant role in immune function, as micronutrients play an important role as antioxidants in our body. So, micronutrients should be, should be taken into consideration. They are very important. So, a daily dose of micronutrient should be equivalent to the RDA, recommended dietary allowances, which are recommended by ICMR, NIN. Moreover, vitamins and minerals may be supplemented if the available diets are not balanced. Next slide. Okay, now we come to dietary fiber. Dietary fiber plays a very important role in HIV positive patients, as there are major gastrointestinal problems in HIV positive patients. So a high fiber diet helps them to cure their gastrointestinal problems. But we have to consider one thing, that people who have poor appetite should not consume foods which are rich in fiber, as it may fill up their stomach quickly, and they may not be eating the main diet which they should have, and it could lead to deficiency of various nutrients. Okay, now we come to next slide. Now we come to malnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies in HIV infected women. So when we talk about the HIV infected women, women is one of the most crucial group which needs a major consideration of nutrition. And we can actually see a lot of malnutrition in these females. These women are basically into reproductive age. They have to bear children also. They are working also, and they have deficiencies also. So these malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies in HIV infected women enhance the problems or the final outcomes and reduce their nutrient nutritional status. So what basically malnutrition is? Malnutrition, anything which is undernutrition or overnutrition comes into malnutrition. So BMI less than 18.5 kg per meter square, which is, or short stature less than 445 centimeters of a female, is considered undernutrition, and overweight females who are more than 25, who have a BMI of 25 and more, are called obese. So they both come into malnutrition, and these both malnutrition can lead to various micronutrient deficiencies and various problems for future pregnancy, lactation, and their well-being. Moreover, micronutrient deficiencies can coexist with these both under and overnutrition. Next slide. Micronutrient deficiencies in women. Micronutrient deficiencies in women is very widely prevalent in women during pre-pregnancy period and often aggravate in pregnancy. That means they already have all these deficiencies during their adolescent, during their childhood, since childhood, adolescent, and but they are hidden basically. But during pregnancy, they all aggravate and come out into major micronutrient deficiencies. The most common micronutrient deficiencies which we can see in females are anemia, iodine deficiency disorders, vitamin A deficiency, and zinc deficiency. And anemia is basically, we can actually say half of the anemia is due to iron deficiency, because there are various types of anemia, but 50% of it is because of iron deficiency. Next slide. The causes of micronutrient deficiencies. So the causes are variant. The very first is inadequate intake. Generally, in India, we have a lot of females who don't properly take their food. They don't eat properly since childhood. They are not getting good amount of food, good amount of energy and nutrients to build up their good uh, system. And it should basically be it should consider of all the important nutrients. Then moreover, there are recurrent infections also in females because of hygienic conditions, because of HIV, because of major things. uh, Recurrent infections generally come, and all the the build up and the uh, storage is basically used in that only if they are able to make up the store. The third important cause of micronutrient deficiency is menstruation. During menstruation, because of micronutrient deficiencies, these females um, have a major loss of some important micronutrients, and repeated pregnancies is one of the most important and the basic cause, because if you can see that mostly we can see that they have repeated pregnancies every year or year and a half. They go for pregnancies, and repeated pregnancies empty their stores, and they become severely malnourished, and there is major micronutrient deficiencies. So the consequences of anemia. Next slide. So we have the consequences of anemia and iron deficiency here. Maternal deaths. Maternal deaths basically occur due to anemia during pregnancy, and it is the major risk factor of maternal deaths. Uh, just a second. Uh, Oh shit. I'm so sorry. I was speaking and it was mute. Um, okay, consequences of anemia and iron deficiency are low birth weight infants, premature infants. There is reduced transfer of iron to fetus, and there is, neonatal mortality. Next slide. Now we'll talk about vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A deficiency um, increases the risk of night blindness in mothers. It can affect the weight of the infant. We can have low birth weight infant, and there could be miscarriage and stillbirths also because of vitamin A deficiency. Moreover, reduced transfer of vitamin A to fetus is very prominent, and vitamin A concentration in the breast milk is also reduced, which can further lead to infants uh, having deficiency of vitamin A, and cause it could cause various vitamin A deficiency disorders to the child also. Next slide. Iodine deficiency disorders. Iodine deficiency disorder, it impairs thyroid function in women, resulting in low metabolic rate. Moreover, iodine deficiency hampers brain development in children. The spectrum of intellectual impairment ranges from mild mental impairment, there could be severe mental impairment, and the child could have cretinism also. It also affects the concentration, cognitive function, and learning performance of the children. And moreover, school readiness is also affected. Moreover, iodine deficiency can cause growth retardation and increase perinatal mortality also. Next slide. Consequences of other nutrient deficiencies like folic acid and calcium is also very prominent in women of reproductive age. Folic acid deficiency, folic acid is basically important in the first 3 months of the pregnancy. If not given, it can lead to various problems also. But folic acid deficiency in mothers can lead to low birth weight, moreover maternal anemia, and neural tube defects like birth defects and brain defects. Calcium deficiency increases the risk of preeclampsia. Next slide. Now we will talk about the changes during pregnancy period. During a pregnancy, a body goes through various emotional and physiological changes. There are various, majorly three changes which occur during pregnancy. First is your physiological changes, the mother's body changes. There is weight gain, there is, um, you know, breast tissue is increased, then uh, we basically say 10 to 12 kg of weight should be increased during pregnancy. So moreover, uh, gastrointestinal changes also occur in a female. There are various gastrointestinal changes like constipation can occur, then she could have more of heartburn or gastric pressure. There are changes in body fluid also, because the mother's body is basically making the blood for the child also. There is the amniotic fluid also made, placenta is also developed. So there are changes in body fluid, and the body fluid increases. Because of this also, the hp of the women also decreases a bit in the pregnancy because of hemodilution. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the nutritional requirements during pregnancy, a normal mother needs additional 350 calories per day. But if we talk about the HIV infected mother, we need to take the previous slide. That is a 10% increase in the asymptomatic stage of energy, 10% increase of energy in the asymptomatic stage, and 20 to 30% of the energy, increase in energy during symptomatic or opportunistic infection stage. So with that, we will add 350 kilocalories per day to a pregnant HIV positive female. So 350 kilocalorie per day could be, you can add, uh, say about a portion of vegetable, a portion of fruit. You can ask her to add one chapati, a portion of cereal, basically it could be a chapati or a dalia or a rice, and she could actually add egg or milk. It would be something like 350 calories overall. Moreover, protein, additional 9.5 gram in the second trimester is important, and 22 gram in the third trimester of the additional. This basically I'm talking about the additional to the normal basically. So when we will calculate the protein intake according to the energy like 15%, then we will add 9.5 gram जो भी आपका amount निकलेगा उसके अंदर we will add 9.5 gram in the second trimester and 22 gram in the third trimester. Fats, again, generally we give 20 grams of fat to a normal adult female, but in pregnancy we tend to increase it to 30 grams. Iron is very important, as a mother needs iron for her own body, for the placenta, for the fetus, you know, because fetus has to basically make the stores for the first 6 months. So iron needs are actually increased. 40 gram of 40 mg of iron per day is recommended to a pregnant female. And basically micronutrient deficiency, micronutrient requirements are equivalent to RDS of a normal pregnant as compared to HIV. तो अगर HIV पॉजिटिव फीमेल है और एक नॉर्मल फीमेल है, उनके RDS ऑलमोस्ट सेम रहेंगे except for the energy which we increase by 10%. Calcium 1000 mg per day, as the body has to, child bones has to be made, child's body has to be made. Iodine up to 50 microgram per day is recommended. Vitamin C is important, as it is again needed for the development of the fetus. 900 microgram per day is required. Vitamin C, additional 15 mg should be given to the mother, as vitamin C again is very important for the iron absorption also. I hope you know that vitamin C plays a very important role in the absorption of iron. Sometimes we generally see that the iron intake of the person is absolutely okay, but because of deficiency of vitamin C or not taking adequate vitamin C, the iron is not properly absorbed. So vitamin C is additionally given 15 mg per day, and folate 570 microgram per day. Next slide. So now the dietary management of a pregnant female. A pregnant female should always be advised to have a well balanced diet. A well balanced diet meal, it should have all the food groups like cereals, pulses, milk, milk products, fat, all the food groups, meat, vegetables, fruits in her diet, so that that is a well balanced and a good diet. A pregnant woman should always be advised she should take some solid carbohydrates in the morning, in early morning, as most of the females have morning sickness, maybe in the initial part of the pregnancy or the whole pregnancy. So she should always be advised that early morning have a solid carbohydrate like a biscuit or banana or something which is high in carbohydrate, so that the nausea is prevented. Then she should also avoid rich, highly spiced and strongly flavored foods, as it can lead to gastrointestinal problems. That the mother could have regurgitation, the mother could have heartburn. So to avoid all these, to avoid this, highly spiced and strongly flavored foods should be avoided. Moreover, a mother should always be advised to have small frequent meals, and a 5 to 6 meal pattern should be advised to her. 5 to 6 meal means she can have something like breakfast, lunch and dinner. So she can have mid meals in between, like around between breakfast and lunch she can have one small snack. Then evening she should have some good amount of snack which is good in nutrients. And before, after dinner, before bed, she can have a glass of milk extra, which can lead to a 5 to 6 meal pattern, and it will help her to add calories and micronutrients and nutrients in her diet. Also, she should be advised to take good quality protein. Good quality protein means she should actually add Animal protein also in any form. If she's a vegetarian, she can actually add soya bean or milk in her diet. So these basically are called class 1 proteins, which are readily and easily absorbed in the body, and they are good for our body. So good quality protein should always be advised to her, that she should every day have good quality protein, which includes dals also. And to avoid constipation, she should always have whole grains and green leafy vegetables, which are very uh, high in micronutrients. Moreover, they have a lot of fiber, so it will help her to prevent her constipation also. Next slide. The importance of good nutrition during pregnancy. A well nourished mother will give birth to a very healthy child. Moreover, maternal diet during pregnancy has a direct influence on fetal growth, size, and health of the newborn. Poor nutrition during pregnancy increases the risk of complications such as prolonged labor and even death. And inadequate diet during pregnancy affects the health of the baby during infancy. Next slide. Now we'll talk about the lactation. Um, Again, energy in the basically energy and protein are divided into two groups: 0 to 6 months when the infant is 0 to 6 months old, and when the infant is 6 to 12 months old. So for a PLHIV, we will again increase 10% energy. In that, we will add 600 kilocalories per day if she is breastfeeding a 0 to 6 months old infant. And if she is feeding a 6 to 12 months old infant, we will add 520 calories per day in her diet. Moreover, protein again, 0 to 6 months, 16.9 gram, and additional 13.2 gram if the child is 6 to 12 months old. These energy and protein again play a very important part in the lactation process, as mother needs a lot of energy. Moreover, milk is produced, so protein is very important for the production of milk. Fat 30 gram per day. Iron is now the iron requirements are reduced as according to pregnancy, because only 23 mg per day is advised, because there's the basic thing is that breast milk doesn't has iron. So this iron is basically needed for the mother for her replenishment, her her micronutrient stores to be replenished again. So iron doesn't need to be increased. Calcium 1200 mg per day, because again milk production needs a lot of calcium also. Iodine 280 microgram per day. Breast milk is very good in iron. Vitamins A 950 microgram per day, because breast milk again contains a lot of vitamin A. And the first 6 months are the basically, a child's diet is basically milk only, a mother's milk. So we need to give all the micronutrients through mother's milk, and all these micronutrients are available in mother's milk. Vitamin C additional 50 mg, and folate 330 mg, microgram per day. Next slide. So now we'll talk about the dietary management during lactation. Very first and the most important thing is there are no food restrictions in for a lactating mother. Generally, if you will have patients, you'll have women who will come to you and they will say, no, we are feeding, we cannot have this, we cannot have this, that. There's nothing like that. There are no food restrictions. Moreover, we should always advise a mother to take increased amount of fluids, because breast milk, when she's secreting breast milk, she needs a lot of water. So intake of fluids should be increased in the form of soups, the form of milk, in the form of um, thin gruels. She can actually have warm water or normal water also to increase the fluid intake. Moreover, she should be always uh, you know advised to avoid highly spiced and strongly flavored foods, as these flavors can somehow enter breast milk, and a child could be a little bit repulsive because of that. 5 to 7 meal pattern, again small frequent meals are advised, because since she is feeding, she feels hungry also, so she should be given small frequent meals which are again nutritionally adequate. Now there is one more thing which is called galactococcus. We have seen in Indian settings that some amount of ajwain, methi seeds, sont, til seeds, or panjiri, dry fruits, gond, all these are given to the mother, to lactating mother, to enhance her milk. If we scientifically see that these galactococcus do not have a scientific, uh, clarification that they actually increase the milk, but again they don't do any harm. So in nutrition we call these galactococcus as very good, as maybe they give a psychological support to the mother, and they help basically to give energy to the mother. So galactococcus should always be advised to the mother according to the wherever the mother's state is. I mean, जोन सी भी स्टेट से वो बिलोंग करती है, whatever is given in their state, in their household, she should be always advised to have those. Next slide. Now we come to the infancy. Infancy is a period in which the child is very small and is basically dependent on breast milk, because it is the healthiest and the most natural food which can be given to an infant. This breast milk is very good in antibodies. It is easier to digest for the child, and exclusive breastfeeding till 6 months of age should be advised. Moreover, complementary feeding should always be advised after the child completed 6 months. A very important is colostrum, which is the thick yellowish milk which comes for 2 to 3 days in the early, the first starting 2 3 days. It is very less, around 40 ml, and it is very thick, but it is very very rich in anti-allergic properties. It is very good in antibodies. It helps the meconium to be the child's meconium to be cleared. So it should always be advised that the colostrum should be given to the child, and it is you know the amount which is excluded is absolutely okay for the child, because child already comes with a good store of energy when child is born. So colostrum should always be emphasized, especially in PLHIV. We should always advise them that colostrum is very very important for the child. Next slide. Now, what are the advantages of breastfeeding? Basically, very first is it is nutritionally tailor made for the baby. Nothing is better than breastfeeding. It has all the anti-infective properties. It is a source of natural immunity which a child gets from the mother. For the first 6 months, basically, child doesn't has a his own immunity. Uh, Whatever immunity he's getting from the mother's milk. So it is a source of natural immunity. It has all the anti-allergic properties. It is very economical. There are psychological advantages also, as the mother and child have a good bond. Crying of the baby enhances the breast milk, and the mother and baby bond is very important. So it enhances the psychological bond and the psychological well-being of the child as well as the mother. The child becomes more protective. He recognizes his mother also. So these all psychological advantages there are there because of breastfeeding, and it acts as a natural contraceptive. The more the mother is feeding, it becomes a natural contraceptive to the mother. Next slide. Now there are types of infant feeding which we actually see. The very first is exclusive breastfeeding. Exclusive breastfeeding means only breast milk, no other fluid or foods, not even water, but only drops of syrup or syrups of consisting of vitamins, minerals, supplements, medicines or vaccines advised by the doctor are permitted. The second option is exclusive replacement feeding. In this, we don't do any breastfeeding. There is no breastfeeding. Animal milk or dairy milk or infant formula is advised to the to the caretaker or the mother. But with that, hygienic preparations are very important, and the mother or caregiver should be advised to feed with a bowl and a spoon, not with bottle. So that is a very important. The third term which we generally see in HIV also is mixed feeding. It means breastfeeding with other foods or fluids such as animal or formula milk during first 6 months of life. Next slide. Early initiation of breastfeeding and advantages of cholesterol. So the early initiation of breastfeeding can actually lead to good it basically provides good nourishment to the child. It is antibody rich, protects against infections and allergies. uh, the growth fact, it helps in to mature intestine, then it prevents the child from jaundice and cleaning its intestine, and it is rich in vitamin A. Next slide. Now, whenever a mother comes to you, you should always advise her that the breastfeeding should be done in a proper way. So, a good attachment is very, very important if a mother is breastfeeding. Otherwise, a poor attachment can lead to various problems like cuts and uh, you know blocked ducts, and it can lead to major problems in which the child is not given milk properly, and the mother also has problems. So these are the basic four signs which should be checked also, and taught to the mother also. The very first is baby's mouth is wide open. So you can see that the in the first picture, the child's mouth is totally wide open. In the second picture, you can see it is just the lips, which the nipple is inside, and it's only the lips which are basically together. So actually we have to see that the black part of the nipple, which is called the areola, it should be inside the mouth. So when the mouth is wide open, the child can actually insert the maximum of areola in the mouth. So most of the nipple and areola should be in the mouth. The third point is baby's chin should touch the breast, and the fourth is baby's lower lip is inverted. So these are the four signs of good attachment which should be checked by a medical officer or a counselor or a nurse, whosoever is counseling the mother, and should be emphasized on each visit that it should occur. If these will not these good attachment won't be there, then because of poor attachment there are a lot of problems which can occur, and they are again dangerous for the mother also and the baby also. Next slide. Now we'll talk about the national guidelines for feeding for less than 6 months of age. With good adherence to ART and a suppressed maternal viral load, the guidelines related to infant feeding of HIV exposed infants are the same as for the infants of not exposed to HIV. So exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of their life should be advised. Introduce appropriate complementary foods after 6 months of age. Continue breastfeeding for 12 to 24 months as per general population. And when exclusive breastfeeding is not possible for any reason, maternal sickness or something else, then mothers can be reassured that maternal ART reduces the risk of postnatal HIV transmission in context of mixed feeding as well. Next slide. Now, when we come to the feeding options for a HIV positive mother, we always advise either mother should exclusively breastfeed or she should exclusively replacement feed. Mixed feeding is not advised, though the national guidelines say that mixed feeding is should be avoided, but again in certain cases mixed feeding can be done, but maximum it should be avoided. Basically mixed feeding, what actually happens when the child basically you know drinks something which is like, when we talk about exclusive breastfeeding, the mother's feed is properly made. There is it is easily digested in the intestine. It is very easy for the child to digest. But when we talk about replacement feeding, the animal milk or the infant formula which we actually give, it can actually hurt the mucosal lining of the intestines, which can have cuts, and the HIV virus can penetrate through those cuts into the body of the infant, and it increases the chance of child getting the HIV infection. So mixed feeding should always be discouraged. Next slide. In any case, when exclusive breastfeeding is not possible, then there are basically six criteria which should be fulfilled by a caretaker or a mother for replacement feeding. So criteria for replacement feeding are: very first, access to safe water and sanitization. sanitation, sorry. That means the you know there should be proper safe water supply, and there should be, the place should be hygienic. Second is, it should be affordable. The patient should be able to afford it. It should be reliably afford. Then can prepare it frequently enough in a clean manner. So the fourth is can exclusively give replacement feeding. The fifth is family is supportive, family agrees for this. And the sixth important point is there should be mother or the caregiver should have access health care that offers comprehensive child health services near her home or her setting where she's staying. If a mother or caregiver fulfills these criteria for replacement feeding, then only a replacement feeding should be encouraged. Otherwise, wherever possible, exclusive breastfeeding should be advised. Exclusive breastfeeding is the best for a HIV positive mother also to give to her exposed infants. Next slide. Now we will talk about the complementary feeding. Complementary feeding is the process of giving an infant other foods and liquids along with breast milk and non-human milk after the age of 6 months. When the child completed 6 months and it starts in the seventh month, then the complementary feeding should be advised. Now, complementary feeding, as the term says, complement. It complements the breast milk. So we don't say that the breast milk should be stopped. It is basically complementing breast milk, because after 6 months, the child's nutritional needs increase. The child is growing very fast. The energy needs, the protein needs, all the needs are increased as the child grows. So we actually have to see that the mother gives proper complementary feeding in proper amounts and in proper consistency. So the mother should always be advised that a child's stomach is very small, like 200 ml stomach. So a child can have actually small frequent meals, and the consistency should always be advised. As you can see in the picture, there is one spoon which is too thin. So a, a food which should not drop easily, which you can see on the right side, that is the just right consistency which should be given. If too thick is given, then the child won't be able to eat. If too thin is given, then the child's stomach will fill, but the child will not get all the nutrients and the energy which is actually which that 200 ml food should give. So you should always tell the mother that consistency of the food is very very important, as the child needs extra energy and nutrients at this stage. Next slide. Now there are some guiding principles for complementary feeding. Introduce complementary feeding at the age of 6 months while continuing breastfeeding. A mother should always be told that start with small amounts and increase the quantity and frequency slowly. Gradually increase the food consistency also and the variety. Like a child who is actually taking a mashed food at the 6 months, can be given small soft pieces at the month or at the age of 9 to 10 months. So consistency and variety should be increased according to the child's age. Practice responsive feeding, which is very very important. If the child is not liking something, don't experiment too much. Stop that thing, give introduce that thing again after 1 week or say 10 days. Mm, so different food combinations should be tried with the child, and encourage the child to eat. Don't force feed the child, which is very important. Or moreover, a caretaker or a mother will actually understand whether the child is feeling hungry or not. So when the child is hungry, then the child should be given so that the child eats properly. Practice good hygiene and proper food handling, again a very important point. Feed a variety of nutrient rich foods. Nutrient rich foods means the uh, basically the foods which we actually use, the staples and the vegetables and pulses which we actually eat, and these are those are nutrient rich. Include micronutrient rich foods like fruits, vegetables in the diet of the child, and increase frequency as the child, as it demands of the child increases. Next slide. The quantity of complementary feeding, which is very important. These are the amounts of food to be offered to the child at 6 months. Texture should be very soft, like porridge, well meshed vegetables or meat fruits can be given, and 2 times per day plus frequent breastfeed. So amount should be 2 to 3 tablespoonfuls, both the times. But when the child becomes 7 month old, when he's into the age of 7 to 8 months, then smashed foods can be given 3 times a day plus obviously breastfeeding, and the amount should be increased gradually to two-thirds of a 250 ml katori or ball. So I will actually advise the health worker to keep a 250 ml bowl with themselves, and it would be easy for the mother to understand how much amount can be given. So you should actually show her and tell her that this two-thirds should be given at least 3 times in a day with your breastfeeds. As the child age increases, 9 to 11 months, finely chopped or mashed foods and foods that a baby can pick up can be added in the diet. With that, 3 meals plus one snack between meal plus breastfeeds are advised. And now the amount of the each meal increases to 3/4 of the 250 ml bowl or a katori. By the age of 12 to 24 months, family foods are introduced. Family foods should be given chopped or mashed if necessary. 3 meals plus two snacks between meals plus breastfeeds are advised. And at that time, we should always advise that 250 ml katori, a full 250 ml katori, should be given to the child 3 times a day with the snacks. Snacks could be either a fruit or a biscuit or something which or you can actually advise the mother to make some nutritious snacks which are low cost, like they can actually powder roasted chana and peanuts and add gur into that and make some burfi or a laddu out of it, and can be given one time as a snack to the child. Next slide. Now next comes the food diversity. Food diversity means that the child should be given uh, the food from all the food groups. We actually say at least 4 main food groups should be included in the diet of the child. So all these foods are rich in micronutrients, energy, and protein, and they are very important for the growth of the child. So should you can actually advise a mother that you can give a khichdi. Basically, khichdi is a cereal and a pulse combination, and she can add some amount of vegetables in it, and she can add some paneer into it or curd into it, which comes out to be a cereal, a pulse, a vegetable, and milk. So these 4 food groups are combined in one meal, and she can give them that meal to the child. Similarly, a combination of all these foods actually, and moreover she can add ghee also. If khichdi, she can add ghee. Ghee is again a form of milk, only it is a fat. So actually she has to basically see that major amount of food groups should be included in the diet so that the child gets a good amount of energy, protein, and micronutrients. Next slide. Now, enhancing nutritive value of foods. This is very important. A mother should always be advised, because after the age of 6 months, around 8 months, a child's teething starts. When the teething starts, the child actually becomes very irritated and doesn't want to eat a lot. The child can have small amounts and then get irritated and leave the food. So at that time, it is very important that you make the mother understand that she can add some nutritive uh, you know nutritive foods which actually can add she can add to the diet and enhance the nutritive value. Like she can add sugar, jaggery, butter, ghee, oil in the diet. Like if she's giving khichdi, she can add a good amount of butter or ghee into that, so that the uh, if the child is eating a less amount, then also he's getting adequate nutrition. Then preparing porridge in milk is again very it enhances the nutritive value of foods. Sprouts, like various pulses mashed in baby's feed, because sprouts are basically rich in vitamin C. Basically, pulses are very good in protein, but when we sprout them, they become rich in vitamin C also. Sprouts are very, rich in vitamin C, so they can be added to the child's food. So the child's food becomes protein as well as vitamin C rich. Then mother can roast peanuts and make a powder and add to the baby's feed. It also increases the energy and the micronutrients and the protein content of the food. Next slide. Now, some important points which should be considered while giving complementary feeding to the child. Only one food should be introduced at a time. A health giver, a health worker basically should be, very, should actually make the mother understand this, because these are the very common problems which a mother faces with the child's complementary feeding, and ultimately she either gives milk only or breast milk also only. So a health worker should always insist and make her understand that these are the most important points which should be followed during complementary feeding. Only one food should be introduced at a time. If she will keep on introducing so many foods, then the child will get confused and the child will not be able to make the taste of one food. So one should be introduced at a time. Consistency of food should be suitable as per child's age. If the child is say around 6 months old, then obviously mashed vegetables would be not that good for her. A soft, very soft, little mashed form of vegetables are better for that age. But if the child is again 7 to 8 months, then mashed vegetables are very good for that baby. So consistency of food is very important. Then food should be given in small quantities. Don't expect a child to have a large amount of food at one time. And moreover, initially the child actually starts having some amount of food, and gradually the food intake increases of every meal. So food should be given in small quantities. The child should never be force fed. If the child is not hungry, if the child is not in the mood of eating that food, he or she should never be force fed, otherwise the child will get irritated and child will stop eating. So force feeding is never should never be practiced. The child's food should not be spicy. So this is very important. This is a very common problem which actually we can see in our setup also, that the food which is made for the family is basically taken out and given to the child. Obviously it is good that whatever you are making should be taken out and given to the child, but you may need to make mother or caregiver understand that it should not have at all spices. At all means no spice except for just salt, and it could be turmeric, not more than that. Not a pinch of chilies should be added to the child's food. Add variety to make food more appealing. Then color, flavor, texture, and shape of the food should be attractive to the child. If the a food is very flavorful or very colorful, the child will get attracted and would actually try to eat it also. And family meals should be modified according to child's need. This is again a very important point, because when we talk about family meals, it is like जब आप एक मदर को बोलते हो तो मदर इज लाइक आई विल मेक फूड फॉर दिस चाइल्ड आल्सो, देन आई विल मेक फॉर द excuse me for the family also. So a mother should always be encouraged that whatever family is eating should be modified according to child's need. Like if you can actually tell her, if you're eating dal rice, so you can take out actually dal also and rice also and cook it a little, make it a little bit soft and mix it and give it to the child. Add some ghee into it. Whatever vegetable is ready to eat can be added, or a boiled egg can be added in that. So you can actually tell the mother the options which she can actually use to give the baby. Next slide. Now we come to the nutritional management of HIV infected children. This till now, whatever I was telling was for the exposed and for the actually children who are not born to HIV positive mother. But when we talk about the nutritional management HIV infected children, it's a bit different. In general, feeding guidelines for HIV infected infants are and children are same as those for healthy children, apart from the need for meeting increased energy needs. At any point of the time, at any age, if the child is comes out to be HIV positive, then we actually need to increase the energy needs of the child. uh, and if an infant is confirmed to be HIV infected, the mother should be strongly encouraged to breastfeed exclusively for 6 months and continue breastfeeding upon 2 years as per the norm of general population. Complementary feedings are introduced at 6 months of age, and the quantity and frequency of food is increased as the child grows. The food consistency is also gradually made thicker and variety introduced, adapting the child's requirement and abilities. And IMNCI guidelines for feeding healthy children of different age groups may be followed while counseling. Next slide. So, the nutrition management of children. Breastfeeding should stop only when a nutritionally adequate and safe diet without breast milk can be provided by complementary feeds. Moreover, assess the child's nutritional status regularly. That is very important. Growth monitoring should be done at regular visits. Additional 10% of energy for HIV positive children who are growing properly should be added. If the child has poor weight gain or increased nutritional demands, then additional 20 to 30% energy should be added. If the child in any case is severely malnourished, then 50 to 100% of additional energy should be added to the child's diet. Next slide. This is the nutritional management of children. These are the IMNCI guidelines which actually we give for the children. So you can go through this, up to 6 months, breastfeed as often as the child wants, uh, day and night, at least 8 to 24 hours. Do not give any other foods or fluids, not even water. These are the IMNCI guidelines which you can see and learn from them and go through them. Next slide. Okay, this is the same IMNCI guidelines. Always remember to ensure that the child eats properly. Teach the child to wash his hands with soap and water. So you can go through this. These are the basic IMNCI guidelines. Next slide. So at the end, I would actually say adequate nutrition cannot cure HIV infection, but is essential to maintain the immune system and sustain physical activity and to achieve optimal quality of life. Uh, Thank you so much. If you have any queries or questions, you can write. I will reply them.
Participants are requested to type their queries in the chat box. Participants can also unmute themselves and ask questions. Ma'am, I don't think we have any questions. Yeah, thank you, Garima ji, for this informative session. We can end the session now. Thank you to the participants for patient listening.